Welcome to That's Good Parenting. I'm your host, Dory Durbin. I'm a children's book author, coach, illustrator, ghostwriter, and podcaster who talks to professionals to provide parents with simple steps to reduce their parenting stress. When it comes to stress, being a parent of an athlete can be uniquely trying at times. The pressure, the expectation, the thrill, the disappointment, there's just so much. So, just how do parents of athletes find that delicate balance between supporting the excellence and protecting their child's emotional well being? Licensed clinical practicing counselor and certified mental performance coach Eric Stevenson is here again to help parents with their athletes access a growth mindset for their sports and their lives. I like to think of Eric as our own sports guru because he's been here. This will be his triple Pete. He was also on episode 84, Avoiding Athletic Burnout, and episode 77, How to Be a Parenting Superfan. So welcome, Eric.
Corey, thank you for having me. Like you said, this is my third time and I love being on. I love to talk sports and especially to help parents because as much as I work with athletes one-on-one, a huge aspect and a huge piece of their development and growth is the parents. And then I think the more well-equipped the parents are, the better, because they're going to be spending a whole lot more time with them than me. That's for sure.
I think parents, it's such a unique challenge. Parenting is tough anyway. And you're trying to teach your children, how to do things and provide for them. And it's like this balance that gets confusing. But there's also like these trends that happen in sports, in the kids' lives. So, Eric, what are the trends that you're seeing with our young athletes, especially when they come to you for help?
Yeah, there's certainly a multitude of reasons or concerns that young athletes will come see me or the parents bring. But of course, there's trends, right? There's very common ones that I'm going to bet are nearly 80% of the time. And the first one, the most common one that we're going to see is athletes where they know they have the skill, right? The parents know they have the skill. They're successful in practice. They're successful in training, maybe some practice games when the meaning or the pressure or the perceived pressure is lowered. But they have a very difficult time transferring those skills and that success to actual competition because parents spend and kids spend money, time, effort with coaches and trainings and one-on-ones and driving them to all these practices and spending time even outside of practicing, right? And I was one of those athletes who practice wasn't enough. I wanted to practice more. And they do all of these things. They put in this blood, sweat, and tears. And then the game comes, the competition comes, and they fall flat on their face. They're like, what happened? I did awful and I didn't even feel like I could be successful, or it wasn't even close to what I know that I'm, capable of. And that's an extremely frustrating experience for athletes. And I think, and unfortunately, this might be the case now. I hope this won't be forever, but we're the last source that they look for. They're like, I've been sending you to the technique coach. We've been doing all of the physical training and the gym. We've been doing extra time here. Now let's go talk to the mental guy, the mental girl. And we're the last resource. And then, at least from what I see, is that they end up being like, maybe you should have been the first one or one along with those because, and we're not going to get too deep into the neuroscience of it all, but really it's like our athletic performance starts at our psychology. Like what is our perception and thoughts around our experience? Because if you have the skill and you've done the work ethic, but you come to a performance and you're in this fixed mindset, and we'll transition to growth, you're in this fixed mindset that if I'm doing all this work, then it has to be worth it. I have to be successful. Or if I'm not good enough, or if I can't achieve these things, then am I wasting all the time? Or who am I? And will people like me? So I don't care how talented and great and how much work you put in. If you come into a competition with a flawed mindset that was created by a lot of false expectations, parenting and coaching, it's just going to make performing that much more difficult. So that's going to be definitely the first one. The second one that's also correlated, the second trend that I'm going to see is parents will be like, my son, my daughter, they fail and they just get so down on themselves. They're just mopey. They dwell. They just become this different person and they hang their head and they get really quiet and they don't want to see their friends. And that also goes along with, they get so mad at themselves. They yell at themselves. They call themselves names. They they hit themselves in the legs. Whatever it is, it's the very big trend that I see is emotional dysfunction towards failure. And a lot of that is driven out of their, again, a false relationship that they have with failure, right? And this dwelling and this mopiness, parents don't want to see it. Kids don't enjoy doing it. I promise you, they might think it's helping them. Oh, if I punish myself or mope, maybe it'll do something. It'll work, right? And we'll get into many reasons why that doesn't work. But it's hard to see, and it doesn't lead us to anything productive. And that's where a lot of my counseling skills come into play to really help them understand the relationship with failure. Because I know certainly I tried it. I said, maybe if I get more angry at myself, then I'll start playing better. And it didn't work. I did it all. I tried to beat myself up as much as possible. And at least my experience, it probably just made things worse. So that's a common one. And I'd say, and Dory, I think the third one, and this is like a big buzzword in our field, is, yeah, Eric, can you help my son, my daughter? Can you help them be more confident? And I'm like, yeah, just tell them to play better. Like they'll be way more confident, right? Well, like kid, there's a lot to say around this misunderstanding of confidence. And I even misunderstood this for years in my field because I was like, yeah, okay, there's all the different research from my professors in grad school to books to people are going to have different understandings of confidence and how to achieve it. But I always thought, man, if I'm really struggling, and sometimes I go back to my own experience, there's some anecdotal help there, but most of what I teach, everything comes from empirical research. But I can think back to my own self and be like, yeah, if I was playing really bad and then I like tried to be positive or tried to be confident, it never really was authentic. It never really stuck or worked. Like I knew I was putting on this facade and it just didn't, it felt icky in a sense. It never really worked. So what I do then first is really help them do some psychoeducation to say, okay, let's reframe what confidence actually is, right? It's the needing to be confident, needing to trust yourself, needing to feel good. Those things can certainly help if they're authentic and truly happening, but you do not need those things to play confidently, right? That is definitely a misunderstanding because guess what? The best athletes in the world, they don't always trust themselves. I know I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was like it was like the world like skiing championships or something in that sense. And they interviewed the individual after and he won. And he said, yeah, my training leading into this was awful. Like I pretty much thought I would just be lucky to finish like in the top 10. And I was like, wow, that person certainly didn't have confidence. That person certainly didn't trust themselves, right? They definitely weren't feeling good. Then how did they perform well? And it's not about having the confidence per se, but it's about making like confidence choices. Like I'm going to choose to do this committed or freely. And that is something you have access to day in and day out because you're not always going to feel good. You're not always going to be confident. You're not always going to trust what you have. I answer that parent's question of help my kid feel more confident by saying, okay, I understand what you mean. And I totally get it, but let's reevaluate what confidence truly is or what you truly need to play well. Because I know some games I did not perform well when I was feeling great. And some games I performed great when I was not feeling well. So they're not a 1-to-1 ratio by any means. So you don't actually need it.
Interesting. Okay. Back to the idea of the parents at the beginning. When you said that parents come to you last, I'm super curious. Why is there that delay? First of all, why are you the last resort, so to speak? Is it like a stigma that people don't come to you?
I think it could be a stigma initially. I don't think that's the number one reason. I'll go back to what I think is number one. But I think the stigma around it, especially like they might have, if they ask their kid, hey, like, why don't we go talk to someone? And it's just, I'll talk to someone or talk about my mind. That can be very vulnerable experience for the kids and the parents. Because the parents might be like, I might be exposed for all the things I've been doing wrong and saying, and they know, okay, I probably have something to do with my kid being really nervous before games or something like that. So it takes vulnerable people to open up and say, hey, we need help or we need guidance or assistance to say, what is the right parenting approach? What is the right approach for my child and how to play more freely, be more happy? That's really the end goal for us. So if there's still a stigma, it's lessening every year, every day, which is amazing. Articles coming out, professional athletes talking about it. I probably saved 400 Instagram videos over the years of athletes talking about it. I'm like, you can name me an athlete you like, and I probably have them saved somewhere in my Rolodex of them talking about their mental. But I think the first reason, Dory, is the face validity of it is very low. So what I mean by that is it doesn't appear or perceive to translate to performance, right? Where if you're a basketball player, you're struggling with free throws, it might be completely mental, right? It might be everybody's watching. You overthink your technique, you get in your own head, you put on all this pressure on yourself. But if you just ask the layperson to say, what's going to help somebody shoot free throws? Like shooting more free throws, we're going to sit down in a chair or on a FaceTime and talk with a mental coach, right? And on surface, it would be like, yeah, if I want to get better at this skill or improve, I just have to practice said skill. Yes. And to some degree, practicing is certainly better than not doing anything at all. But like I said at the beginning of your podcast, a lot of times these athletes already have the skill. They can do these things when they're in their backyard, when they're in their driveway, when no one's looking, practice exhibition games. But they do not have access to those skills. They can't tap into those skills when it actually means something. So I think they come to therapy, they come to see sports psychology consultants last because just on paper, it just doesn't appear to. How is talking with somebody going to help you become a better athlete? And I can see that too, right? I can definitely understand that because it's not going to be on the cover of a magazine, right? It's not going to be in a Nike commercial. That's like sweaty people in this dark gym throwing medicine balls or hitting in a cage or shooting a basket or skating on ice. That draws the attention more visually. And hopefully Nike comes out with a commercial in 20 years where it's just like an athlete sitting in a chair and then it's like hard work pays off, right? And let's reframe really what hard work is because like running and push-ups and stuff is hard, but sitting in an office and being vulnerable with somebody about your psychology for an hour sometimes could be the hardest work of it all.
Okay, one other question on something you said, confidence. Do you feel like parents come to you to ask for confidence for their athletes and inadvertently coincide confidence with success? In other words, the only way that they're going to be successful in their sport or achieve the goals is to have the confidence to do it.
Oh, 100%. I think that's what they see is if they see their child failing at the sport, it's, oh, you're just not confident. Or if they see them get down on themselves, they misunderstand or misrepresent that. Oh, you're just not confident. And so that's sometimes what I look like when I'm like, I'll ask them, well, how do you know when your child's confident? One of the biggest misconceptions or just in psychology is trying to interpret or understand what someone's thinking, right? Like I'm parents all the time. My parents sometimes will say, oh, you just weren't doing this or you weren't thinking that. Like, how do you know what I was doing? And I hear parents do that all the time. So if I ask parents, like, how do you know when your kid is confident? Oh, it's when they're playing great and all. I'm like, there we go. We just debunked what I just talked about, which is like, you don't need to be confident, trust, feel good to always play great. So if they're not playing well, then they must lack confidence. And if they are playing well, then they must be confident. And in a sense, it is related to success because yes, if you're getting success, if your boss is complimenting you, if your coach is complimenting you, just in general life, if you're getting the outcome success, you're going to feel confident, right? Wow, I feel good in myself, right? Nobody goes, oh no, I don't, that doesn't change anything. You're going to feel more confident. And then yes, if you're struggling or there's a lot of adversity, a lot of failure, you're not going to necessarily feel as confident, right? But it's more about self-efficacy. It's more about the belief that you have the skills to do it. And then it's more about the stable confidence, being able to say, I don't know if I'll be successful or not. I don't know what this outcome will be or how I'm going to feel. But what I do know is and this is what my representation of my whole work is, detach from your distractions. So past distractions are like failures and mistakes. Future distractions are like what if thinking, outcome oriented, down the road. What is this going to mean about me, my future? If you can understand that your brain will go there, but but there's skills that I teach to just detach from there and come back to the present moment. If you can be in the present moment and you can perform freely in that moment, if you can commit to what you want with a clear intention, that is stable confidence, right? That is the ability to just be present and to focus in on this singular specific task of what you want. That is all you really need to perform well. Outside of that, it really doesn't matter at all. So parents will see that when I'm like, yeah, if your kid's playing well, there's probably something to say they were present and confident in that moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's always going to be the case in a sense. Yeah, I think there's definitely a misunderstanding of success and confidence. Well, it's like you can be confident and fail, and you can be successful and not have confidence. So right then and there, let's reevaluate what we actually mean by confidence.
I love what you just said about that space where you're, how did you say it? You're detached.
Detaching, yep.
Because I was just imagining being an athlete in that situation. Okay, doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. Doesn't matter what happened before. It doesn't matter in the future. This is the moment. That's so freeing. Just thinking that much without even.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
so yeah. I'm just thinking too, like as a parent who is a quote unquote athlete, loosely with the quotes there. I know sometimes too we model things as parents that we don't even realize that we're modeling, and our kids are picking that up as well. And how should we be modeling more of a growth mindset for our kids?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so key and important is we kids are going to learn from modeling more than what you tell them, right? Do what I do, not do as I say, not as I do is I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole because that is not going to be very effective.
We
Um,
can as a parent because you're like, oh, I've totally done that. Oh, shoot, I can't
yes,
be mad at you because you saw me do that. Yeah.
exactly. So, right. So if you're an athlete, even as a parent or you're a competitor in any given realm, what you do and how you respond to adversity, success, and how your children see that being modeled is more powerfully than probably anything else going to relate to them. So, for example, if you're an athlete and you're a parent and you have adversity, right? You run into failure, right? Like how you respond in that moment is massive. So, something that I teach like athletes, usually themselves, to say, okay, if you have adversity or you fail, having a growth mindset is essentially going, okay, that doesn't define me. That doesn't define me as a person. This doesn't define me. It's not pervasive and it's not permanent. It doesn't mean that I'm going to always fail. So what I always tell parents is to say, okay, it might be hard, but if you fail or if you see failure, be careful to not dwell on it, to not make excuses about it, because what you're doing in that moment is you're trying to protect your identity, right? You're trying to make this a big deal. But if your kid sees you fail and they know you failed, and then you just carry on with life as if you had a success, they'll go, oh, wasn't that big of a deal to mom and dad. Or they're not complaining about the ref or the failure or their teammate, or they're not dwelling on themselves or ruminating on their hard work not paying off. They're not doing any of that. They simply just failed and then continued on. So I really even focus on the language that mom and dad are going to use in that moment to say, okay, you know what? I learned how to not do this, or I learned how to not do that, right? Maybe next time I'm going to be able to do this, right? Okay, I don't have this skill just yet. They always talk about the power of yet in terms of the growth mindset. So your kid hears you use those terms. Those are growth mindset oriented, vocabulary terms, as opposed to, I guess I'll never win, or I'm not good enough to do that. Or, oh, it was the ref's fault, or the playing conditions, surfaces weren't great enough, or it was this. If you're defending yourself and using these fixed terms, yeah, your children are probably going to mirror that at some point and start to become these fixed oriented sort of ego protecting athletes. What it's not even just about the reason we focus on growth versus fix is because if you truly and authentically develop a growth mindset, that in itself is where we start that whole process of playing without anxiety, playing without fear, not dwelling on mistakes, not getting angry, not overthinking. That is all predicated initially on having a growth mindset. So this is where we start with parents to say, hey, developing your youth to have a growth mindset is so key, because otherwise, if they have a fixed mindset, yeah, they might be successful in the low end of the learning curve. But as soon as they get into middle school, high school, college, and they're facing better athletes, better competition, more constricted room for success, that fixed mindset will be exposed really quickly. And they'll go, I guess I'm just not good enough. Or what's wrong with me? Or what mom and dad said I was a winner or a star. And I'm not winning anymore. I'm not a star. And it's, yeah, you know how many times Olympians win gold? Very few. And guess what? They're Olympic athletes. So they're not winners, right? They're not champions. And you're going to tell me they're not good at what they do, right? It's, of course they are. So we have to be very careful again with the vocabulary that we use.
Yeah. Okay. A couple things. First, I'm thinking to myself, I need a redo for my kids. But then the second thought I had
Yeah.
was, there's a way to fix that as a parent. If you realize that in the past, you've used the turf as a bad example, but if the turf wasn't flat or whatever, the excuses that you come up with, maybe there's a way to shift that even though that they've seen you do that. Is that true?
Mhm. Yeah, there definitely can. Again, that's the whole definition of a growth mindset is nothing is fixed. It can always be changed, right? It's the ability and the belief that you can develop something over time with consistent effort, right? That is a rough definition of what growth mindset is. So it doesn't even matter where you start. It's not, oh, it's too late. They have a fixed mindset, right? Or, oh, it doesn't matter if they're 5, 6, 7, or if you yourself as a parent are trying to develop a growth mindset. That's where it says, so maybe I can change this fixed mindset that I have. And it's about the reoccurring intention to develop that. It's again being about first, before I get into any conversations with athletes, the first thing I want to do is a whole lot of information gathering. I'm like, okay, well, how do we know we have a fixed mindset? What are some reasons? What are some signs? What is the fixed mindset? How do you understand that? What does that look like to you? What do you know what a growth mindset is? So the first place to start as a parent or a parent of a young athlete, say, how do I know either my kid has a fixed mindset? And I'll give you some reasons there. And how do I know I have one? So the first, what the psychology behaviors of change, right? It's pre-question, contemplation, and so on, is to really at first initially look at saying, okay, what are some of my signs? What are some of my symptoms of a fixed mindset? Okay, how do I begin to change these, right? Okay, I got to be very careful with language that I'm using with myself, right? How am I perceiving outcomes and what they mean about me? And why do I feel fulfilled or good enough only when I have these outcomes? What's that about? Why do I need these outcomes, whether that's money, trophies, scholarships? Why do I need these things to make me feel like I've won at life or that I'm good enough? Again, that's where we're going to go more counseling field and start to go a little bit deeper. But that's really where the underlying foundation of the fixed mindset comes, because there's some sort of belief system that developed over your time. And a lot of times it's, what are my parents like? How did my parents correct me or influence me when I was a child, when I was in high school, when I was an athlete myself? Because there's probably a lot to be said there that has a lot to do with how you think now. But being able to, yes, it can be changed over time if you continually put intention on it. Catch yourself being in this fixed mindset. Oh, I'm just not good enough, or I just can't do this. Oh, that was a fixed mindset type of description there. Okay. Why, how can I reframe or re-guide that statement to myself? Okay, maybe I'm not good enough at this time, but I can be better if I keep pushing towards this goal, if I keep learning and growing. And even professional athletes that are in their 30s, 40s, like they are still in this belief. Yeah, if I just keep working hard, if I keep learning from every mistake that I make, if I keep making these changes, I am just continuously going to grow and get better. It doesn't end, right? It's not, oh, you've reached the growth mindset or you've reached this goal. It's this everlasting, evergreen mindset that with more time and more effort and persistency, I can get better.
Yeah. So it's a refining of what you already have, but just stepping it up. And I think a lot of people put those limits on having the fixed mindset without even realizing they're doing it. So that's really interesting. Okay. I have more questions. Otherwise, I keep digging into that one. But
For sure.
one of the questions I wondered about too was the there definitely is another line between what's healthy for our athletes to try to achieve and what's not healthy. And I had never heard of this, Eric, until my husband brought this up. There's a term called big rexia.
Mm,
And I had no clue what that was, no idea that was even something that kids were trying to achieve,
yeah.
and was shocked by it. So maybe you can tell them from your perspective what big rexia is, but also what is healthy versus unhealthy as far as achievement for our kids or pursuing the achievement.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question because that's certainly a gray line to some extent for a lot of individuals. Like, what is too much and what is enough? Because again, what are we always told, especially our young athletes? If you want something, you just got to work hard as you possibly can. As hard as you possibly can is probably clinically dysfunctional, right? It's probably going to be an issue at some point, right? So it's like, where is that line, right? So bigorexia, a lot of times, it's this like body dysmorphia, this flaw or it's a mental health condition, but in terms of how are they perceiving themselves, right? So similar with anorexia or eating disorders, it's this continuous push to achieve this goal that never really has an endpoint, right? Because there isn't an endpoint because it's mental health, right? It's simply rooted in this image or belief system that they have. So I need to be stronger, I need to be bigger. So this continuously lifting and getting bigger and overeating and a lot of things, overtraining is cheating. So like steroids or unhealthy patterns of growth hormones, whatever it is, get that edge. And that, in a sense, like that particular instance, that's going to be treated really with a clinician, really with a mental health therapist to really help them understand and really break down their patterns of behavior, their irregular thinking patterns and say, okay, whoa, what is enough? Why do we need to achieve this? What sort of concern or what sort of missing link is there that is creating some of maybe this insecurity, this worry, this struggle with their image that they're seeing of themselves. So we can go down that rabbit hole with the clinical aspect of it for sure, but that in itself could be pretty independent from person to person, but mental performance coach, probably not for them. Definitely more for a licensed clinician like myself or a psychologist or social worker or something like that specializes in body dysmorphia or eating disorders would be really good. But the other side that relates a lot to athletes, and again, very similar traits, is where is that fine line between working really hard versus, we'll use the term overtraining. And overtraining and burnout are different. Burnout is more of the psychological burden of training where you're just, I'm done. Like I've been putting in all this effort, all this time, like I have no motivation anymore. So burnout is really associated again with a lot of fixed mindset stuff, being driven by parents too hard or coaches too hard. But overtraining is the actual physiological detriment of too much time, energy, focus on the development, which is, like we said, athletes. And I do see this at times. They're like, I'll give anything to achieve my dreams. And that's, oh, wow, like every coach's dream. Yeah, this kid will do anything. And it's like, you're not supposed to practice like 11 hours a day. Like that's probably not healthy long term, right? So if we're seeing just similar to a clinical perspective, right? Because guess what? People get angry, people get anxious, right? People overthink. Okay, none of those things are problematic alone. But when those things start to approach upon dysfunction of someone's life, and where we measure those in terms of therapy is how is it affecting their sleep, their eating, their relationships, their work or their school, or just like their general health. If those things start to become implemented, because not wanting to go to school is very normal for a high school kid, but missing school because they're having meltdowns or they're so incredibly anxious about going to school on a daily basis. Okay, that's dysfunctional. So now we have school refusal, school anxiety, which becomes a diagnosis. So it's very similar. Hey, are you working as hard as you can? Yes. Are you getting injured because of it? Are you losing sleep because of it? Are you skipping hangouts with your friends or family because of it? Are you irritable and angry if you can't train, right? If you have to miss some time, okay, we'll start. So when we start assessing those things more in a clinical spectrum, now we're going to see, okay, ask them to say, because eventually it's almost like an inverted U. Like, yeah, the more training, again, with proper psychological framework, because again, training won't transition because you can train all you want. But if you're like, I have to be a star because my dad told me, good luck, right? It's going to you're not going to be able to perform super free and in the present moment. But yeah, the more training you do, it's going to increase the likelihood of success. there can be, then you keep going, eventually it starts tipping the other way. And now you start, again, a lot of clients that I've seen that have overuse injuries, that are eating improperly for what their goals are, what they're trying to do. They're losing their friends or their relationships with their friends. They're not getting schoolwork done on time or completed because, again, they're in this belief that more is better. But if you talk to any physiologist or a kinesio, like sports focused trainer, they're going to say there's actually like a kind of a point that is perfect for their sport. And it's not as much as you think, right? It's actually only this amount of reps, this amount of time, et cetera, that is the most efficient prescribed amount that a trainer is going to give them. So if you talk to a personal trainer or an athletic trainer for a professional or high collegiate team, they're going to say, here's the workout for today. And then the rest is rest. And so one of the things that I always tell my clients who maybe struggle with perfectionism, overtraining, because a lot of overtraining is rooted in anxiety and perfectionism, because they're searching for a sense of control. If I just train more, then I can control my outcomes more. Nope, unfortunately. And I always ask, okay, how's that working for you? So like you're a star now. And I'm like, so it hasn't been working for the past 3 years. Like maybe, are you willing to try something different? But yeah, it's the more that they train, it's rooted out of this anxiety, right? They're searching for control. It's something I always tell my athletes is resting is hard work, right? And again, back to your first point of face validity. Why do people not go see a mental coach right away? Because sitting on the couch and watching your TV shows seems like something a lazy person would do, or seems like something like somebody that's not driven would do. But the next frontier in performance, similar to sports psychology, is recovery. So some pro athletes that I know, their coaches are measuring their sleep, their rest, their recovery. Like they say, we actually concern more about how much your recovery and sleep patterns are versus we know you work hard. We know you do the work, but recovery and rest is, if not more important than the actual work itself. So when I help break that down with an athlete or even a parent to say, hey, let's look at the benefits scientifically of sitting on the couch and doing nothing. If you now can understand that increases the likelihood of your success on the field, then they become a little bit more willing to do that versus just always train.
That's really fascinating. I think at least my upbringing was always, you're lazy, like you said, if you're not doing something to progress it. And
Right.
I actually can think of in high school and in college and other people now that they get their coaches workout and they think that's okay for them, but I want to be better. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to jog another 5 miles today or whatever, just because it'll make me feel like it's so much easier later. So it's justified in their minds, but really, like you're saying, if they're not following the workout and not doing the rest of the rest days, their body's not going to recover anyway. So they're never going to perform the way that they want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Because this podcast has so much good information and Eric is so knowledgeable, we've decided to split this longer podcast into two. So you have just listened to part 1 of this podcast with Eric Stevenson. Please come back and listen to part 2 next week or look at the episode list for his next one.